This conference will
People
now
hear
be
us.
recorded.
And now that we're being recorded, we'll get started. If you would, please, everyone stand, remain standing, and we'll start with our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Caldwell, would you please grace us with invocation, please?
We thank you, dear Lord, for the work that's going to be done. We thank you, dear Lord, for the dedication of the people who sit on this room serving this town. And we thank you for the dedication and passion of the citizens who come here concerning what goes on. We pray that you will bless this meeting, bless Lord, and this has been our own sake. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
We'll have a short pause of silence for our neighbors who've passed away, Kira Slicker, Alexander Fimble, Gloria Mize, and Sherry Hobbs, and any others that we not mentioned. Thank you so much. Please be seated at this time. Please turn your ringers off, or at least put them on silent. And I'll ask the board if there's anything anybody has in a conflict of interest with on the agenda, please let me know now. Next up will be the adoption of the agenda as it is. A motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to adopt.
Second. John. All in favor? Thank you. All right, next up is public comment. We have Pauline Britton. Pauline Britton, please step up.
Thank you. Over the past 5 years or more, we have experienced continued government overreach on many levels, deeply affecting our basic human rights. We consider it basic human rights to have access to organic food and fertilizer for our gardens. We consider it basic human rights to have the right to private enjoyment of our properties. It is incredibly important now more than ever to pay close attention to our local government and to fight against government overreach by our very own elected officials. Each of you took an oath of office to uphold the Constitution. I want to remind you that the North Carolina State Constitution, Section 1 states, we hold it to be self-evident that all persons are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, the enjoyment of the fruits of our own labor, and the pursuit of happiness. Section 5, every citizen of this state owes paramount allegiance to the Constitution and government of the United States, and no law or ordinance of the state in contravention or subversion thereof can have any binding force. Contravention, an action that violates a law. We have the right to private enjoyment of our property. On January 15th of 2025, according to the Carteret News and Times, Frank Rush stated that he wants to include additional requirements to the town chicken ordinance to include requiring an annual inspection of our backyards, on-demand inspections of our chickens by town staff, and charge an additional $100 per year. Instruction on how to feed our chickens and to ban auto feeders because of the misinformed opinion that they attract rodents. I ask you, what's next? Ban all bird feeders and outdoor dog and cat bowls? The very idea of this is repugnant. Frank Rush, Julie Shamba, Commissioner Watson Barnhill want to make these changes with no supportive evidence that our chickens attract rodents. In actuality, the NC State rodent specialist hired by Frank found that chickens were not the cause of the increase in the rodent population. The specialist told me personally that the best course of action is to trap regularly and to hire an exterminator. We find at this point it is a witch hunt and bordering on harassment should this issue continue to be pushed. As there will be new elections for commissioners this October, I urge the citizens of Cape Carteret to pay close attention to what each commissioner and future candidate represents. be sure to align with the ideas of personal freedom and liberty. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Do we have anybody else? Sound like? All right, that's it for public comment. Next up is planning board report. Anybody here from the planning board?
Mayor Baker, Commissioners, new member Michael Denmead was supposed to provide a report to the board tonight. I don't see him here tonight. I'm happy to give you a brief summary of their activities if you'd like. So actually they took action on 5 items, all of which are on your agenda later on tonight, and I'll be happy to explain all of those at that time. They did have a productive discussion with the new members. It was the first meeting we've had since October. So I'll save the explanation of those items for your consideration of those particular items. One other item I did want to mention is that for the past year or so, they have been meeting at 5:30 on the third Tuesday of the month. They have changed that back to, assuming the Board of Commissioners approves tonight, they'd like to change that back to 6 p.m. For their future meeting. So that's one of the items on your consent agenda item coming up in just a moment. So with that, I'll save the explanation of the items for later on.
Thank you, Frank. Next up is the consent agenda.
Motion to adopt consent agenda.
Okay, have a second.
Second.
All in favor? Okay. Thank you. All right, just let everybody know we have 5 issues coming up, so we'll have a plethora of public comments, just to let you know we got to do for each one of these. So we're going to start with the ordinance amending ordinance amending the Unified Development Ordinance to require a non-conversion agreement for new construction in flood zones.
Thank you, Mayor Baker. This item would essentially create an amendment to the UDO that would just strengthen and reinforce one of our current requirements in the UDO. Part of our UDO is the flood damage prevention ordinance. That is a requirement for our residents and property owners to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. We currently have many requirements in that ordinance to deal with new construction in flood zones. One of those requirements is that any enclosed spaces below the regulatory flood protection elevation may not be used as habitable space. So that requirement is in place now, has been in place for several years, pretty common standard provision in the program. The ordinance that you have for your consideration tonight would amend the flood damage prevention ordinance. In addition to that requirement, it would simply add something called a non-conversion agreement. And it's simply another document that is executed by the property owner, generally at the time that a building permit is secured. And it simply restates their commitment to not go back after the fact and use that enclosed space for habitable purposes in the home. So that document would typically be signed at the time of permit issuance. We would likely not record that document with the Register of Deeds until such time that a CO is ready to be issued. And it's really just another tool to make sure that people are compliant. Again, we don't allow that now. I'm sure that you have seen in this community and in other communities examples where people have gone back after the fact and they've actually converted space. This is just another tool to prevent that from happening in the future. By actually recording that with the Register of Deeds, it basically is attached to the property in perpetuity and carries forward with other property transactions. So the planning board discussed this at their meeting last month. They did unanimously recommend adoption of this ordinance by the Board of Commissioners. So be happy to answer any questions you may have about this. Yes, sir.
Frank, I love all the new amendments to the UDO. My only question is we're going to amend the UDO, who's going to enforce it? Who's going to be the person that's going to go out there and show a badge and say, broken the law? We don't have a codes enforcement officer. And honestly, going forward in the budget, I'd like to see that replace one of the positions that we have now in Town Hall, because we need a codes enforcement officer going forward.
So we currently have a town planner position that also serves as our code enforcement officer position as well. And ultimately, I'm accountable for those enforcement activities occurring. So the best structure to do that, we certainly can discuss that and talk about that as part of the budget process. But that responsibility falls on the town planner now. One of the provisions that's included in this UDO amendment is the right for the town to inspect these enclosed areas in the future. We certainly would coordinate with the property owner to make that happen.
My question is, who is educated enough, certified by the North Carolina Department of Insurance to do these inspections?
Yeah, so the flood damage prevention ordinance, it's a pretty standard document used by a lot of communities. It's required.
That part I get, Frank.
Yeah.
My problem is I've been here a long time. I've been with Guy Dark. Probably none of you ever heard of Guy Dark. David Reef, when he was the code enforcement official, Brandon Hawks, and Mike Stanley. We never had any issues because when the code enforcement went out to the town, they had a badge, which makes them a lawful state agent. Step on the property. I just want to see it come back.
Okay. I'm not aware of any requirement for that, so to speak. We certainly have the authority granted in the ordinances to enforce those ordinances, and we need to enforce those ordinances. When it comes to the flood damage prevention ordinance, it's pretty complex set of regulations.
It's a whole UDO is what I'm looking
Yeah, okay. Well, but what I wanted to say to you is that there is very specialized training available for the flood damage prevention ordinance, and we've invested in that for the town planner, who is the most qualified person in our organization to do that. With regard to other aspects of the UDO, that's basically incumbent upon me to make sure that those activities occur. So I'm happy to talk about that further during the budget process.
I want to suggest that when we do these next ones, we just go ahead and do the public hearing, and then we can have plenty of discussion.
That's fine.
Y'all okay with that? Yes. All right, so a motion to go into a public hearing. Make that motion, Charlie. Second. All right, all in favor? All right, we're now in public hearing. Did we have anybody sign up to speak? Any comments? If none, then I'll entertain a motion to go out of public hearing and back into the regular meeting. Make that motion. Thanks, Charlie.
Second that one as well.
All right, all in favor? All right, so now we're back in regular session. Any more comments? Questions?
What do we gain by this? I know that there's a complex formula for NFIP, but it's not going to actually kick us down a bracket.
Yeah, so that's a great question.
Why exactly what are we gaining specifically from this?
Yeah, so first of all, this is not required by the, one of the items that they recommend as a best practice for communities in flood zone. It has the potential to get us a better rating. There's something called the CRS rating, and that basically includes several steps and activities that a town undertakes to hopefully prevent flood damages in the future. By default, you have no rating. By actions that the town has already taken in the past, we have a Class 8, and that gets all of our property owners a 10% discount on their flood insurance premiums. This activity is one of the things, and there are many, that potentially could get us to a Class 7 and get an additional 5% discount for our property owners in the future. But it is not required. It is just simply another tool to promote compliance with the requirements of the NFIP and the flood damage ordinance. It's basically, the applicant is signing the form, it's being recorded, it's another mechanism to reinforce the notion that we can't be enclosed in this space. And again, that requirement already exists in the UDO. That's a standard requirement of the National
I
Flood
guess that's
Insurance
what I'm getting
Program.
at, is if it's already a requirement in the UDO, why do we need another ordinance to say the same thing?
Yeah, so truthfully, you don't. I mean, if it's something that you're not comfortable with, you don't have to pursue that. We're not required by that program. There are certain things we are required, and the town has done that. Again, it's another tool to reinforce that, to promote compliance, and it has the potential to lower the insurance premiums in the future.
What would it take to get the additional increase? How much more onerous are those? So I guess what I'm getting at is, are the additional requirements so onerous that is something we would never pursue? Or is it something that is not so onerous and it would be worth pursuing?
You're talking about is in terms of us securing
to get the extra 5%, to get to a Class 7.
Yeah, so I think we are currently at 1,320 points. I'll explain the rest of it, and it'll give you some context to that. We would need to get 1,500 to get the next rating. This action, we think, will get us about 60 points, so we're not going to quite get to the Class 7 by this alone. There are all sorts of other things, public education activities, other requirements. You might want to consider a different free board requirement in the future. And I'm not as well versed on all of the things that contribute to that. But I think number one, it's not required. Number two, you should not assume that we would get to a Class 7 with this, although it does help us and we may get there at some point. And number three, it's just reinforcing something that's currently required.
I guess that's where my question lies. Our goal has been to simplify the UDO, and having two places that say the same thing is not simple, in my opinion.
Understood.
Does it say it in two places?
It doesn't say it in two places.
It will
It's
if we advance this ordinance, though, correct?
Yeah. So keep in mind, everything that's in this non-conversion agreement, it already says that in the UDO. So this is simply reinforcing that, but it is additional language. It is making it a lengthier document, but the requirement's already there. This is just simply saying that you've got to sign this document and we're going to record it with the Register of Deeds. And it's really an informational tool for whoever the next owner of the property may be. And I think really it's kind of more in tune with kind of reinforcing for that property owner, hey, don't go back later and enclose this space illegally. That happens sometimes. And so that's the intent behind it. Is it absolutely necessary? No, it's not.
Well, it can be enclosed, it just can't be habitable, right?
Yeah, there's certain things you can use that space for like an entrance into the home or for storage and things like that. So some people use it for storage. That's fine. Some people use it as an enclosed entryway to go up the steps into the house, for example, elevators, things like that. You're not allowed to have utilities down there. You're not allowed to use it for living space. And again, there are people in this community, there are probably people in every community in the flood zones in Carteret County that have gone back after the fact and they've converted that space. This is just another tool that the NFIP recommends.
So when you're talking about the numbers, are you saying we got to start somewhere to build up to get to a certain level? I don't think I understood.
Additional actions would get us more points.
That's right.
My concern is that those additional actions may or may not be in line with the town, with what the town wants to do or what the people in the town want. So in my opinion, if we are trying to get to this Class 7 rating, maybe we need to explore what all of that would take from us.
Sure.
And before we start adding what amounts to an easement on every property that's below the floodplain.
Yeah, so I think I would look at it probably first and foremost as just a reinforcement of an existing requirement. I think the planning board found value in that, but ultimately you've got to make the value judgments on those kind of things. I think that the potential to lower the flood insurance premiums in the future, that's just kind of an extra reason why you might want to consider doing this. But I think first and foremost, if I were you, I would look at it in terms of, do we want to reinforce this requirement? Do we want to discourage people from going back after the fact and doing this? That would be, to me, the main motivation for doing it. If we can do some other things and reduce people's flood insurance premiums, yeah, absolutely would love to do that. But as we bring additional things to you, you all would need to make the value judgment and say, yeah, we think that makes sense for our community, or no, that doesn't make sense for our community. And you may say that this doesn't make sense for our community too. I just wanted to bring it to you. So
I understand that. If it's already something that's required, having that piece of paper attached to a deed is not going to change whether or not our enforcement folks can go enforce that. Right?
It does convey additional authority. It does indicate that the town has the right to access the property and to inspect that property in the future in a mutually agreeable time with that property owner. I mean, right now we have the requirement, we have certain provisions that say basically if it's a violation, could be a misdemeanor, could be $100 per day fine going forward. This is just one other tool.
But this could also be something that we get the planning board to look further into the remaining items that we could add to the UDO for those, that additional research that you mentioned.
I just don't, I don't think that there is a pressing need for us to make this decision right this second.
Okay.
And I would like to know if we're doing this and a benefit is that potentially we can get a flood insurance discount, which is great, that there's a path to that. Because if the next, I don't know what the next, give more points is, but if the next step is CAMA gets to come walk through your yard whenever they want to, that's a non-starter for me. I don't know what those steps are, or what the possible, other options are to get that rating. But I'd just like to know more about that before we force everybody with anything below the flood elevation to attach a document to their deed that runs with the land forever.
Yeah, and it's a reasonable position for you or the board to take. One thing I want to make sure I'm perfectly clear on, because I don't think I said this before, this would only apply to new construction going forward. So this does not apply to any of the existing construction in the town, whether they're in a flood zone, whether or not they've already enclosed certain spaces. It's just new construction going forward. And I honestly, if you want to do it, I would base it on the fact that it reinforces the current requirement. To me, any flood insurance premium reductions is a bonus. But if you'd like to wait and analyze other things to get us there, that's a perfectly reasonable position to take.
We send it back to the planning board so they can get a report as to how we get to the 1,500. This included.
Yeah, absolutely.
Things.
Absolutely.
I'd like to make a motion that we table this and get a little bit more information before we start adding regulations. I understand, Frank, that
No, totally get
I
it.
understand where they're getting at, but I think unless I am missing something, our current UDO covers this and we have the authority to enforce it in either case.
I agree with you. I think you brought up some good points. I agree.
I'll second the motion.
Second. All right, all in favor, table? All right. Next up is the ordinance amending Unified Development Ordinance to require zoning permits for lot clearing and or grading activities and to simplify other zoning permit requirements.
Thank you, Mayor Baker. This item was also discussed by the planning board at their meeting in January. And this has actually been discussed a couple of times in probably the last 6 months or so by the planning board. In our UDO, we currently do not require a permit for lot clearing or grading activities. There's been some confusion about that in the community. We do require it for many things, certainly building a new home, putting an addition on a home. There's a list in the packet: driveways, signs, fences, and so forth. But we do not require it at the time of lot clearing or grading. Oftentimes what happens is that the person does the lot clearing and grading in conjunction with building a new home. So in that scenario, we get a permit. It covers all of the activities that are occurring. There are some occasions when a person may clear the lot long before they have any intention of building a home. Perhaps they're just trying to get ahead of the game and prepare the lot for future development. Perhaps they're trying to market it for sale and so forth. We don't require a permit in that circumstance. And so we discussed this with the planning board several months ago. They engaged in thoughtful discussion about that, ultimately decided not to bring anything forward to the board. In conversations with this board in recent months, Commissioner Ritchie asked that we take it back to the planning board for additional consideration. They did that at their meeting in January, and they recommend that we include lot clearing and grading in the list of activities that require a zoning permit for the town. They had a very thoughtful discussion again about that issue. Essentially, the planning board wanted to include the requirement, but didn't want to be overly burdensome to the property owner. So they stipulated that it would be a no-cost zoning permit. But most importantly, they wanted to be clear on what types of lot clearing and grading activities would trigger this. So the intent is for large equipment, a bulldozer, an excavator, heavy equipment coming on the lot. Is not intended to apply to things like hand tools, chainsaws, bush hogging, things like that. It's the significant grading activities. It's the significant tree removal activities. And so they put that stipulation in it. That's reflected in the language in the ordinance amendment in your packet. And so if the board approves this ordinance amendment, we would require that going forward. Like I said, when people are building a house, they do this anyway, but it's going to pick up those situations where there's no house planned at the moment. One thing that I think the board just needs to keep in mind is that unless there's some really significant situation or perhaps some sort of like state or federal regulatory issue involved, we're going to issue the permit because we don't have any standards that say you can only clear X% of the lot, or you can only remove this tree, or you have to save these trees, and what have you. So the value in the permit for the lot clearing activities is really one of situational awareness for the town staff, for the people in the community, as well as just another check on compliance with potential state and federal regulations. So that's what this ordinance amendment would accomplish if the board's inclined to go forward with that. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have if you want to go into a public hearing, Mayor Baker. So.
All right. Motion to go into the public hearing.
I'll make that motion.
All right, second. All right, all in favor? All right, we are now in the public hearing regarding this issue. Did anybody stop to speak on that? Okay, any comments? If not, then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn from the public and go back into regular meeting. Okay, second. All in favor? All right, questions, comments, Brian?
Right. I'm in total support of this.
Sure.
Only because in my neighborhood, I had one guy clear 3 half-acre lots, which is 1.5 acres, which would have triggered a major CAMA permit. No CAMA permit was ever filed for. And I really hate to say this, but, you know, we had erosion on those lots. I had you out there to show them, and you were totally unaware of it. I think it is very, very important that we have a zoning permit issued for all lot clearing, only because it allows us to see what that person's gonna need. It's like the guy next door to me showed up one day with nature equipment, started cutting down trees, and I was like, where's your silk fence? He's like, what? I mean, you're 65 feet away from the water. And he was from Rocky Mount. He had no idea what CAMA was and what he needed. So I think it's very, very important because we get a lot of people that are from around here that do this for a living. And, you know, we need to keep our waters, and that's one of my biggest things. It's our number one asset is our waters. Clean.
Understood. The one thing I wanted to also mention is that the ordinance amendment in your packet also simplifies the ordinance. It combines some repetitive language in there, but doesn't really change the substance of those requirements. So.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt this as written.
Second.
All right. All in favor? All opposed? Passes 4-1. 3 more. All right, we got the, next up is the ordinance amending the Unified Development Ordinance to include alternate planning board members and clarify planning board members' terms.
Thank you, Mayor Baker. Commissioners, one thing I want to point out to you is that I left at your places tonight a replacement ordinance. So the version that is included at your places tonight is identical to the document that is in your packet, with the exception of one other sentence that was added in red. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but I just want to make sure you've got the right version of it. So you may recall at a recent meeting, Commissioner Ritchie suggested that the town consider having alternate planning board members. We had some situations where we had absences and it was difficult to get a quorum. So the idea of alternate members is something that would probably resolve that concern going forward. We currently have a planning board that technically is supposed to consider members. 5 members appointed by the Town Board of Commissioners, 1 member from the ETJ appointed by the County Commissioners. Because we only have 2, for practical purposes, we have 2 parcels that are in the ETJ that could be developed. they're both vacant. We don't have any residents in the extraterritorial jurisdiction. So therefore, we do not have a representative of the ETJ on the planning board because no one lives there. I think it'll probably be several years before someone does. So it's a 5-member board. It's appointed by you all. They serve 3-year terms. They're staggered terms. There's currently language in there also that limits the planning board members to serving 2 consecutive 3-year terms. So this ordinance amendment that's presented for your consideration tonight would expand the makeup of the planning board. It would keep it at 5 members appointed by the town board of commissioners. It adds 2 alternate members. The language that's included in this ordinance amendment stipulates that those alternate members would serve in the absence of one of the regular planning board members, and they would have the opportunity to vote on matters in that circumstance. This ordinance also says that those alternate members would be allowed to participate in all of the discussions among the planning board members. And I think, to me, that's an important element to consider so that those folks stay engaged and stay knowledgeable about the issues that are facing the town and the activities the planning board is involved in. So the 2 alternates, fully participating members of the planning board, but would only vote if 1 or 2 of the regular members are absent. So we have purposely structured this to not assign a term to those alternate planning board members. That may be something you want to consider doing differently. But I think the intent would be that because these alternate planning board members are serving really in that alternate capacity, that eventually, hopefully, they're promoted, so to speak, to the full planning board. And then hopefully it's good training ground for future planning board members as well. As we've discussed in the past, I mean, you certainly have the right to remove anyone at any time that you find necessary. There's a couple of other changes, and one of which is the reason for the replacement ordinance. The planning board specifically discussed the ETJ requirement, and I told you that we don't have any residents in the ETJ right now. The planning board suggested simply removing the language in the UDO about the ETJ. The replacement version that you have at your place tonight, initially when I drafted this and included it in your packet, I honored the planning board's request, and I'm comfortable with that. I think that's a reasonable request. And I just deleted the reference to the ETJ member. The version that you have in front of your places tonight came about after talking with the town attorney. And so I added a sentence in the version that's at your places that basically just says, at such time that there are residents in the town's ETJ, the planning board shall also include ETJ representation consistent with the North Carolina general statutes. And the reason we added that back in for your consideration is that it's just basically a trigger. So that at such time, if none of us involved in this now are with the town at that point in time, that someone actually lives on those parcels, it'll trigger them to go through the process, have the county commissioners appoint someone to the planning board from the ETJ, really just to make sure we're compliant. And then the other change that's in the version in your packet and also the one in front of you tonight, it just simply takes out the term limit. So we would delete the section that says planning board members can only serve 2 3-year terms. So that was something that was requested by the planning board during their discussion. They also had a thoughtful discussion on these issues, and they did unanimously recommend that the board approve this ordinance amendment. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, so we also have a public hearing. I'll entertain a motion to go on to public hearing. Sure.
Second.
All in favor? All right, once again, we're in public comment. Do we have anybody to respond? Okay, any comments? If not, I'll entertain a motion to go out of these public hearing and back into regular session.
Make that motion.
Second, all in favor? Thank you. Feel like I'm in the Groundhog Day.
No.
But you got to do it right. All right, any questions, concerns for Frank?
Remind me if I missed it, Frank, but what is the purpose of removing the term limit? What was the gist of the discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I think essentially they just did not find it necessary or beneficial, and they also noted that there are no term limits for any other positions in the town, including the Board of Commissioners. And just felt like it was something that's not necessary.
Wait, it used to be 2.
Yeah, my understanding is it was like there were no term limits for at some point, and then there was a change made in the past.
Yeah,
Then, so.
planning board, a lot of years.
Yeah, I have to say, I've certainly used the playback of the video from the planning board discussions to, assess and evaluate my, opinion on certain things. And so it is valuable to have as many people as possible in the discussion. So I think adding people to that discussion is good. So I think I'm in favor of that. I think as far as the term limits, I think we, have all discussed that, the planning board serves, the board of commissioners. And so I think it's good to have, I think it's good to have term limits, but at the same time, it's kind of a catch-22 because when, the board should be able to decide who they want in. And like you said, if you can't find a planning board, you should be able to continue with the same one you've had. So I think I agree with this.
And if they're doing a good job,
Yeah,
I'd like to keep them on.
yeah, absolutely. So I support this.
What, it may be an attorney question. What are the board's remedies if they have a problem planning board member in their opinion? Are they, once they're appointed, or will they finish out their term, or
It would be up to this board. So if
this
they,
board has the option to, or they
That's
still
like
have?
when we had that last
Right.
election, and that's what happened. Y'all
Yep.
cleared the board. So you can
Okay,
do it again.
I just want to make sure.
That's part of it.
That's all I had.
Anybody like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we accept this UDO planning board.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor? All right, thank you. Next up is ordinance amending the Unified Development Ordinance to maintain consistency with state impervious surface definitions.
Yeah, so this ordinance amendment, really straightforward. You may recall that we amended the town's stormwater management provisions in the UDO sometime last year. We lined up our definitions exactly with the state's definitions, including what they specify that is not impervious surface. So there's a whole list of different surfaces that are not considered impervious surface. Recently, toward the end of the last legislative session, the General Assembly amended those regulations, and they clarified that artificial turf is also not considered to be impervious surface. So this ordinance amendment simply aligns our UDO with the state's definition of impervious surface.
All righty, now a motion to go into a public session, public hearing again. Thank you, John. Second?
Second.
All in favor? All right, we're once again back. Public hearing, do we have anybody on this? Comments? All right, then I'll entertain a motion to go out of public hearing, back to the regular session. Thank you, John. Second, all in favor? Thank you. All right, any questions for Frank?
Excuse me. I'd like to make a motion to adopt the ordinance amending the UDO to maintain consistency with the state impervious surface definition.
Okay, is there a second? John, all in favor? Last but not least, is the ordinance amending the Unified Development Ordinance to clarify sign regulations for the new town center zoning district.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Baker. Also very simple and straightforward, correcting an oversight from the town center zoning district requirements that you all approved last year. The intent in that ordinance that was adopted last year was to apply the signage regulations for the B20 zoning district to the town center also. And we actually just stipulated that freestanding signs could be located closer to the street and have a smaller lesser setback. So in the B20 zoning district, a freestanding sign has to be set back 20 foot from the street. In the town center zoning district, because we're intentionally trying to put those buildings up closer to the street, when you adopted the town center zoning ordinance, we stipulated that it would be 5 feet. And that's included in the ordinance you already adopted. That's already in the language. The oversight that I made is I simply forgot to reference B20. And so just to make sure that it's clear going forward. So this is really more of a technical correction than anything else. So.
All right, have a motion to go into public hearing for last time. John, second?
Second.
All in favor? All right, we're once again into the public hearing. Do we have anybody on this one?
No.
Nobody. We're consistent tonight. Okay. Any comments? If none, then I'll entertain a motion to go out of public hearing and back into regular session. John, second. Thank you. All in favor? All right, we are back in regular session. Any questions for Frank?
I'd like to make a motion to adopt the ordinance amending the UDO to clarify and sign regulations for the town center zoning district.
Okay, second. All in favor? All right, thank you. Next up is the discussion of the lease agreements for the 204 WB McLean Drive property.
Yeah, so the 204 WB McLean property, former police department building, there are 3 rental units in that town-owned building. 2 of those units are leased by the Girl Scouts. 1 is leased by Cult Life Custom Carts. Those leases were entered into at different time periods over the last 5 or 6 years. However, they all expire on September 30th of this year, 2025. We have talked about the project to hopefully secure funding assistance from the federal, state, or county government to build a new town hall police station on the site of that building and demolish that building. And that's why we lined up the termination for the existing lease arrangements to be the same date, September 30th. That's now roughly 7-8 months away. We've been making efforts in recent weeks and months to secure funding from the federal, state, and county officials. But realistically, I don't think that we'll be in a position where we will need to demolish that building shortly after September 30th. I think realistically speaking, if we are successful in securing funding from the state or from the county government or the federal government this year, it probably would not be available to us until sometime next year in 2026. And then once we know that we have that funding source available to us, we would need to go through a detailed design process, and that's going to take several months to do that too. All that to say that I don't think we're ready to demolish that building. The town receives a net of more than $50,000 annually in rental income from that building. That certainly helps to support our annual budget. I would really not like to lose that rental income for next fiscal year. The recommendation for you all to consider is extending those existing lease agreements for 1 more year through September 30th, 2026. I've had some preliminary conversations with both the Girl Scouts and also Cult Life. They are both interested in extending the leases. The Girl Scouts, if the board is inclined, would welcome any longer lease extension for that, for those 2 units that they currently occupy. My recommendation to you would be to do a 1-year lease extension to secure those revenues for next year's budget, and then see where we're at probably this time next year. And you can make a decision at that time. Do you want to extend the leases again, or do you want to do something different at that point? And that's the decision for y'all to consider tonight. So. Yeah, I mean, if you tell me tonight that you would like to pursue that, I'll put that on the next agenda. If it's a 1-year lease extension, we are not required to have a public hearing. The board can take action without that. If you did want to do something longer, we'll have to advertise and so forth. So.
Clause that they understand that we may.
We have a 90-day termination.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think going into this, I mean, the intention is that we would honor it through September 30th of 2026, if that's the direction the board wants to pursue.
Or just a consensus for that?
I mean, if there's consensus from the board on this issue, I think that's fine. I'll bring back the official documents to extend the leases at your next meeting. But I wanted to make sure that I was proceeding in a way that you're comfortable with. So it sounds like I am.
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
Got it.
All right. Thank you.
All right, next up is a resolution requesting, restorative zoning authority for North Carolina local governments.
Yeah, so this is an issue that you've heard a little bit about in recent weeks. In November of last year, the General Assembly adopted legislation very late in their session, and it had nothing to do with zoning or anything like that. They did, however, include provisions regarding something known as downzoning, which essentially is an action that an elected governing board may take that changes the intensity or maybe the range or the number of permitted uses that we would authorize in a particular zoning district. It could be taking action to enact regulations that make it harder for someone to develop a piece of property, maybe impose new restrictions on it that have the net effect of reducing the intensity or the density or the number of uses on that property. And so generally, I think that's a good policy position for any governing body to take, whether it's the state, whether it's you as the Board of Commissioners. Um, the problem with the legislation that they adopted back in November is that it's really poorly worded, and I don't think that they fully understood the consequences to how that legislation is worded. It has caused significant concern among local governments in North Carolina. That essentially it makes it almost impossible for any governing body going forward to amend your UDO. Because there are arguments that can be made that you violated this provision in this session law from November of last year. And so a lot of other cities and counties have adopted similar resolutions, and you're scheduled to consider, as you will consider tonight. If the board is concerned about this, I will transmit the resolution to Senator Sanderson and Representative Carnes. It essentially says, General Assembly, we're concerned about this provision. Could you please either rescind that provision in the law, or could you simply exempt the town of Cape Carteret from those requirements? And so either one of those solutions, I think, would work completely well. There are some bills that have been introduced in this new session of the General Assembly that repeal these provisions altogether. There are other bills that exempt certain counties. I've not seen Carteret on any of those bills yet, but it wouldn't surprise me if it does show up. I'm sure there's going to be several other bills introduced. It's on the surface, I think it's a good policy goal for the General Assembly. You know, my philosophy is to try to promote and encourage new development in our community, try to promote economic success, additional options available for our property owners, create a prosperous community. And we're constantly trying to look for regulations that are consistent with the community's values, but that provide that flexibility and that promote prosperity in the community. And so I'm actually my philosophy does not align well with downzoning, and I think it would be used extremely infrequently. But sometimes there are some examples that people could perceive as downzoning that might be very beneficial to the community. There may be certain uses in the future in Cape Carteret that you just want to regulate in a different way. And there may be very good reasons for that. And there may be widespread support in the community to do that. But the way that this legislation was written and adopted, it essentially says you can't do that unless every single property owner that could be affected by it agrees. And that's probably impossible anyway to get every single person to agree, certainly very unwieldy. If it's a zoning district change, probably a little easier. You've got a defined area. but still some of our zoning districts have got several hundred properties in them. And if you enact some sort of change that might potentially restrict what someone could do there, even if it's a great idea and everyone loves it, you're subject to legal challenge. And so there's other things. If you just adopt a text amendment to the UDO, and let's say that you want to adopt a little more significant stormwater requirements, for example, that applies to everyone in the whole town that's engaging in new development. And technically, you need every single property owner to agree to that, which is just not going to happen, right? And it may be a widespread support in the community, important community goal. So from my standpoint, and obviously it's all subjective and everybody can form their own political opinions about the legislation, but from my standpoint, I think it's an admirable policy goal by the General Assembly. I think the implementation and the effect and the unintended consequences are very, very troubling for any North Carolina local government. So with that, the resolutions included in here, I modeled this after a similar resolution that the town of Morehead City recently considered, but there are several communities doing similar things like this. So happy to answer any questions you may have. And
That was
certainly
my question. How many
Brett's-
other municipalities have sent resolutions to the legislature?
Yeah, so I don't know the number of that have sent it or that have taken action, but there are several. There are several local bills out there already. Morehead City just considered it recently. You might have seen that article in the paper. I expect they may have. Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's very rare that you see an issue where almost every local government agrees. And I think they all pretty much agree on this one from what I can tell. There's just a lot of concern about it. The League of Municipalities is already working on it. And so it's just, at a minimum, I hope that they'll go back and at least adjust the language and be clearer about what it means or what it doesn't mean. So
is this an exact resolution that you're going to send, or are you going to make changes to that?
no, I mean, if the board approves this, this will be the resolution that I pass on to Senator Sanderson and Representative Carnes. And if you're not comfortable with the language in it, we certainly can adjust it in whatever way you think is best.
So if we get listed as an exception in the county also, will we written?
I think honestly, if they exempt Carteret County and its municipalities, that's great. If they exempt the town of Cape Carteret by itself, that's great too. But I suspect all of the towns in Carteret County will want the exemption.
You need a motion, Mayor?
Yes, if y'all would like to make one, I'll be happy to sign it.
Well, I'll make the motion to adopt a resolution requesting restoration of zoning authority for North Carolina local government.
Second.
All in favor? Thank you. The thing I hated about that was the fact they did a 180-day exemption. So in other words, they went back in time for that. So I understand they were trying to do something right, but I think they were just in such a hurry to pass things here recently. Like people actually read what they're voting for. That would be nice. All right, next up is the town manager report.
Several items in the written materials. I'll just touch on a couple of the more significant ones. So number one, your annual budget planning workshop is 2 weeks from today, the February 24th at 9 o'clock in the morning, right here in this room. I've included a copy of the draft agenda in there. If there are other budget items you would like to discuss at that meeting, please just let me know in the next couple of days, and I'll be happy to include that. I'm basically going to be spending the rest of the week crunching numbers and trying to get a better sense of where everything stands to hopefully have a productive discussion with you on the 24th. The NC 24 multi-use path, you may recall we were awarded a grant for $920,000 to build that 10-foot wide path from Yopon Drive down to Bayshore. The board formally approved that. We formally executed an agreement with NCDOT. The funding associated with that ultimately is federal funding. And so there's some question as the Trump administration reviews all sorts of federal programs. There's a question about whether or not that funding might be rescinded or altered in some way. The truthful answer is I don't know. And I don't know that anyone knows for sure right now, given the efforts that are underway and the speed at which those things are happening and all of the uncertainty that exists. But I did have a conversation with NCDOT last week. They indicated to me that they believe our funding is secure. The agreement's been executed. The funds have been obligated. I think that will be a nice benefit for our community going forward. My intent, as I've shared with you before, is to finish the last segment of the bike path on Taylor Notion Road and then go out and solicit engineering firms to design this. So hopefully that will happen later this spring. My goal is to be able to get to construction by maybe this time next year going forward. So more to come. And if you learn anything about the Trump administration's efforts and how that might affect us, please let me know that. But I guess we'll see where things go. Boat ramp passes, we're at 214 right now. So we've basically got 86 left. If you haven't got yours yet, I'd encourage you to come into town hall or visit our website and do that sooner than later, because once we hit 300, there will not be any available. I'm expecting to bring a final plat for the Lakes at Star Hill townhomes for your consideration at your March meeting. They are nearly complete with the first 4 units, nearly complete with the common area improvements out there. So they're going to be seeking final plat approval to actually record those lots and therefore make them official with the register of deeds. So that's coming soon. We've got a property owner on Taylor Notion Road has submitted a preliminary site plan for new commercial buildings. We're currently reviewing that and going back and forth with the applicant and their representatives on that. That will probably go to the planning board potentially next week, maybe at the March meeting, and then ultimately it'll come to the Board of Commissioners after that. You probably saw that the speed limits have been reduced on Taylor Notion Road and on Highway 24. They just changed those signs sometime on Friday. I did ask them to put some warning flags or signs up out there. They indicated to me they would do that. They thought that was going to happen today. I'm not sure if it happened today or not, but I'm sure it will happen very soon. So they have implemented those changes. They have also made adjustments to the timing of the traffic signal by McDonald's at Manatee Street. So let me know what you experience out there, what you hear from people in the community. They did also just inform me today that they do not believe a traffic signal is warranted at Bayshore Drive and Fox Drive. They undertook an analysis. They did traffic counts out there at that location in early January. Essentially, when they make those decisions, it's based on the crash history and it's based on the traffic counts and the turning movement counts at that location. They said that it did not warrant a traffic signal. I asked them if they could reconsider that and update the traffic counts in the summertime, because obviously there's more traffic out there. They said that they could potentially do that again this summer. So I'll pursue that again and ask them to complete some additional analysis. But yes, sir.
Can they do it like in the hours when we have mad rushes to go to work?
Well, they do it in a 13-hour period. So I think they're picking up really the full range of activity during the day. But clearly, there's not as much traffic in January as there is in July or August or what have you. So,
Did you try to
Yeah.
cross the road, test the light out?
I have not yet, but I occasionally walk over to Starbucks and I get halfway across the road and have to start running because, but I have not tested it yet. I'll do that. So, other than that, the Taylor Notion Road multi-use path, the contractor has got the route of the path staked. I've got a little bit of a hiccup with the Forest Service parcel out there and trying to work through some issues with the Forest Service and DOT. I think I've got those resolved, but I've got to submit some additional documentation to NCDOT. They've indicated to me if we make these changes, they'll be comfortable with them, but I have to document them. So essentially, we're going to be shifting the path slightly closer to the road, just where the Forest Service parcel is. And it's been an interesting dialogue with the Forest Service and DOT, but I think we're just about there, and hopefully I'll get that wrapped up here in the next couple of weeks. the Easy Street bulkhead, we have finally received the CAMA permit for that. So I expect the contractor will get started out there real soon. We got a property owner who objected to that initially, but that's been resolved. So other than that, lots of other things in there. I'm happy to answer any questions about the other items or really anything that's on your mind about the town. So.
Frank, how many pylons are rotted out on the Bay Shore Pier?
Best I can tell, there's just one. I mean, I don't know if you've been down there. You literally can like jump up and down on the pier and it'll move. Some of the others may have some damage, but they're still structurally intact. So we're going to give that some attention here sometime real soon. I don't think it's a safety issue right now, but we need to address it.
Okay, I was just, since we're starting the budget discussions, I don't want to be blindsided, later on. If we need to replace something, it needs to be included in the budget.
Yeah, understood. Yeah. I think, based on Ryan and our initial look at it, we'll probably try to sister up a new pier next to the one that's, it's basically just deteriorated. It's not there anymore. So.
Yeah. Based on what you think today, what do you think is completion date, rough completion date of the trail?
The Taylor Notion Road.
Based on what you know today, when can we expect the trail to be completed?
Yeah, so you've heard me say before that I thought it would have been completed by now, and obviously that didn't happen. But the real trick is getting them started. I think once they get started, it'll go fairly quickly, maybe 30, 45, 60 days at the most. So I will say my goal is to have it done by Easter. And I think that's probably reasonable, just given what I know about the adjustments we have to make and the processing of the paperwork and all that kind of stuff. So they're essentially ready to go. And I've told them, you can go ahead and get started on the entire sections that don't involve the Forest Service parcel. So the whole segment's about 2,500 linear feet, give or take. The Forest Service parcel takes up about 750 feet. So you may see them out there getting started on everything but the Forest Service parcel. To a certain extent, I think they might be a little relieved that we've had this little hiccup because they got a lot of work to do. And it probably helps them a little bit that we haven't gotten started yet. On the other hand, they're ready to go and they're ready to get started. But so I'll say around Easter is my goal.
I have one more question. Have you identified the spring paving needs in Bay Shore?
So that would be in fiscal 25-26. We did the paving for 24-25 a couple months ago on Anita Fort and on Yopon. So
have you identified the needed paving for the spring project?
We haven't identified the specific streets yet, but that's not going to be, it's going to be sometime after July 1. We may do it in the fall. I mean, this year we kind of got a head start on it and we did it in the fall. I think they did it in early December. But if there's particular street segments that any of you are aware of that you think need attention, please just share that with me. But once we get a little bit closer to doing that next year, we'll go out and do an analysis of those segments.
So you're going to include that in your budget also then, right?
Yeah, I expect we'll include at least $100,000 for paving next year from the PAL bill funds. And you all can certainly discuss whether or not you'd like to allocate additional funds.
Any more questions for Frank? All right, now then we're going to move on to Commissioner reports. We'll start with you, Commissioner Martin.
Yeah, I don't have anything to say other than thank Ryan and his staff for the job they're doing with the stormwater. Keeping on. Hopefully we'll get ahead of it and stay ahead of it, not let it pile up on us. We can do some more culvert cleaning and whatnot. So everything's looking good as far as stormwater. A lot better than it was 3 years ago. I want to thank Ryan and his staff for that.
I'm good. Okay, we'll make it. I'm good. No report.
Well, we're talking about funding and what's going on with federal, and Frank and I met with Senator Tillis' staff. I'm one of these guys that I wait till I know exactly what I want before I ask for it, and so I figured, well, with what's going on with the turmoil, there's so much money being unearthed that, why not so to speak, and that's what we were looking at for them. And so I'm still going to hold out hope, but like I say, it'll be probably next year if we get any money. How it comes with a lot of this stuff, it's what you asked for. The wheels turn, but they turn excruciatingly slow. Well, I also met with Senator Budd's people. He's echoing the same thing. It'll be March before they even start looking to do anything like that. Their concern right now is trying to figure out where the money's being wasted, and then they can redirect where it needs to go, which I'm all for. When you see some of the stuff they're wasting money on. But once again, thank you guys. It's an awesome job. Saw them out there picking up the brush today, Brian, and everything's going great. And they were putting the speed signs up as I was coming down the road. I'm like, oh, that's great. Yeah, we got this today. I thought it was going to be, not quite as soon as they put it up there. It's Nashville. I fielded several complaints about it, but I was hoping they'd have put the flag on the sign so that way they would get your attention off the bat. But I believe, Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, we're not hammering people right now, maybe just warning them in that little section.
A lot of warnings on Saturday.
Yeah, a lot of warnings there. Now, if they're in the regular place where we already know it should be going 35, then definitely write your Parks Desire tickets to those. We appreciate it. But thank you guys for being here tonight as well. We appreciate having people here. It's your town, as I say every night. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn. All right, second. All in favor? All right. Thank you, board. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Have a great week.
Yeah, I know. I kind of flattened me that out.
I'm like pretty good at it, but
Yeah. 10.
We table